Thank you. Let's call the Public Works and Utilities Committee meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please? Ms. Diaz?
Yes. Counselor Joanne Vigil Coppler?
Present.
Counselor Signe Lindell?
Present.
Counselor Romano Beta?
Here.
Counselor Chris Rivera?
Here.
And Counselor Michael Garcia?
Present.
Okay, everyone is present.
Thank you. Next, approval of the agenda. Any changes from staff?
I have no changes, Mr. Chair.
There are no
Mr. Jones?
changes. There are no changes from utilities, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. What are the wishes of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Move for approval by Counselor Vigil Coppler, second by Counselor Lindell. Any further discussion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote? Ms. Diaz?
Yes. Counselor Joanne Vigil Coppler?
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell?
Yes.
Counselor Romano Beta?
Yes.
Counselor Chris Rivera?
Yes.
And Counselor Michael Garcia?
Yes.
Motion passes.
There's nothing on the consent agenda, so we'll skip that part. Approval of minutes from July 27th. Any changes from staff? Mr. Romero?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Jones?
There are no changes, Chair.
All right, anything from the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion for approval by Counselor Lindell, a second by Counselor Garcia. Any further discussion? All right, can we have a roll call vote? Ms. Diaz?
Counselor Joanne Vigil Coppler?
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell?
Yes.
Counselor Romano Beta?
Yes.
Counselor Chris Rivera?
Yes.
And Counselor Michael Garcia?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Next, public comment. Anything from your side, Ms. Diaz?
No, Chairman, no public comment.
Anything from you, Ms. Pasula?
No, Mr. Chair.
All right, so public comment is closed at this time. Nothing on consent agenda. We're on the presentations, ICIP, excuse me, 2022 through 2026. This is just the process kickoff meeting, no action involved, but I have asked John Romero to give us an overview of the program, what it's used for, the importance of having items on there, and then answer any questions from there. So Mr. Romero, if you can get us started, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we're going to be talking about is ICIP. It stands for Infrastructure Capital Improvement Projects. And this list of projects is submitted to DFA and is used primarily for the process of applying for and securing legislative funds. I'm going to give just a quick overview of different capital lists we have in the city, because I know it can be confusing and they all sound kind of the same. The first one that we have that's not this is CIP, Capital Improvement Projects. And the way the city has used that list is that's the list of funded projects. If you recall, I presented that list to this committee and onto council for the purpose of freeing up operating money, reprioritizing and freeing up operating money for capitalizable expenses. During that discussion, we decided to hold off on construction of Fire Station 2. We moved money from Swan Park to Soccer Valley. So that list is a list of funded projects, and that's what's our active capital list. The Public Works Department, we maintain another list. It doesn't have an fancy acronym or a formal name, I refer to it as the kitchen sink list, and it's basically a list of any project want that we've had from constituents, counselors over the past several years. And it's just, we just keep a running list of all these to-dos that we would like to do, but it's not a fiscally constrained list. We don't have any funding identified for them. And it's just, again, it's an unfiscally constrained list that we just maintain. Another capital list is what's called the IFCIP, Impact Fee Capital Improvement Plan. And what that is so developers, as they build, when you build a house or you build a commercial development, depending on the extent of your development, you have to pay impact fees. And you pay fire impact fees, police impact fees, roadway and parks impact fees, those 4 separate impact fees. And those impact fees are used for the expansion of the respective infrastructure or program. So for instance, for roadway impact fees, the monies that we get, we cannot use that to repave roads because it doesn't expand our roadway capacity, allowing more cars to flow more efficiently. But what we can use it for, and we are currently, for instance, is Agua Fria South Meadows. We've paid for a portion of the design out of impact fees, and we're going to be looking to pay for the construction out of impact fees, amongst other fees that revenues that we've obtained for that project. And the reason we can use it for that is we're expanding the capacity of that intersection. How it improves how many cars can comfortably go through that intersection. So we could use it for that. So in order to use money for those type of projects, those projects have to be on the IFCIP, the Impact Fee Capital Improvement Plan. Not only do they need to be on that list to use those funds, that list is of projects, including the total dollar amount, is used in establishing that fee that we're assessing development. There's also a parks and trails, open space portion of the IFCIP. There's a list for that. And I'm not terribly familiar with police and fire, but there may be a list for those. I'm not sure, but that's what IFCIP is. What we're talking about now is ICIP. It's the Infrastructure Capital Improvement Plan. That term and title is developed by DFA. So it comes with forms that we have to fill out that DFA provides, and it generates a list through a DFA database. We have to enter all this data into a database, and it creates this list. And so the purpose of this list primarily is if we want legislative funds for a project, it needs to be on this list. So what we do, we've shared with you, and I'll put it on my screen just to go over what last year's list was. We tried to be as general as possible when creating this list. So that way, for instance, if you wanted a specific sidewalk project and wanted to lobby a state representative for it, we have a generally titled project on our ICIP that we can say, yeah, when they ask us, one of the main questions is it on your ICIP? We can say yes, but then we can make a more specific one. I want John Romero Road to have a new sidewalk or something like that. So we try to do that. Other things, there's some questions that I just want to touch on real quick about what it's for, what it's not. The legislature gives us programmatic type funding, program funding. That's not included on this list because it's not a capital plan or a capital fund. And so that is managed by community services. I don't recall the name of what that plan is, but there's a separate legislative prioritization that community services does. And I believe that will now get channeled through our quality of life committee. But that's more for programmatic stuff, like stuff to help to pay for a service as opposed to pay to build a building. That being said, there are programmatic buildings that we can request on this list. For instance, the teen center, it was on the list last year, and we received legislative money for it. So even though it has programmatic impacts, it's still a capital improvement. So those type of things we would want on this list. Nonprofits, a question, are nonprofits eligible to apply for legislative appropriations? They are if they're 501 B3, I believe is what it is, C3 organization. Have to be in good standing, and they're eligible to do that. If they do receive funds, we end up serving as the fiscal administrator. So basically what happens is the DFA establishes a funding agreement with the city, and then we have to in turn get into a funding agreement with the respective nonprofit. When they spend the money, we reimburse them. Once we reimburse them, DFA reimburses us. So we're kind of like a middleman for those type of projects. Another question is, see here, can private roads be included on the ICIP? I don't think they can be. I think it can violate anti-donation rules. It's still public funds. It can be given to private entities if they're utilizing public infrastructure. So that's a possibility. So for instance, like the dance barn, I don't think the dance barn, those NDI could build their own facility. I think the building that they have is on publicly leased properties, the way I see it working out. But I can get more clarification on those, more firmer information on that if you're interested in it. But again, that more involves some of our nonprofits. Another thing I wanted to mention is, give me 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so again, the time frame for this is just a kickoff meeting. We can go over projects, but right now I kind of just want to go over questions primarily to explain how this works, why we need to do it. The way this time frame works is we have a deadline to submit our ICIP to DFA. And in order to meet that deadline, we're going to be coming back to Public Works Committee, the next committee meeting, with a formal list, and we're going to ask for recommendations. Between now and then, please work with me. We could add projects to that list that we bring forward to Public Works Committee for consideration to be added. And then we can continue that process. After that, we'll go to Finance and on to Council. We have all those stops to tweak this list. But it'll have to follow next Public Works Committee, the following Finance, the following Council, in order for us to meet our deadline to submit to DFA. After we do that, we have this list. I'll be working with you individual councilors to come up with your district priorities. And what we do is by resolution, we approve city priorities and district priorities. The district priorities, the way we usually do it is we work, say with the councilors from District 1. And individually together, and we kind of come up with what between the two of you we agree would be the priorities for District 1, same on District 2, 3, 4, and that gets approved as part of a resolution that also approves citywide priorities. Now, those citywide priorities, what we typically do is we talk to the mayor, and he comes up with his first brush of priorities, and then we bring that through committees. And those get tweaked. You guys can discuss them, decide what other projects you would like to move up, which ones you don't. And we eventually approve that resolution that has all those priorities. And we send that off to our lobbyist, who then advocates for those on behalf of the city to the state legislature. That timeframe doesn't follow the exact deadline as our ICIP. We just have to have that done before the legislative session starts. When we get ready to do that, which will be soon after this, I will be in contact with our lobbyist, and just to get a sense for what kind of money we can be expecting this upcoming year. And it'll help us to know, how much to ask for. These past few years, we've actually been able to ask for quite a bit, and we've gotten a lot. This year we'll see, it may be less, but that way we know what context to put it in. What I suggest for this year is that we limit any new projects on the ICIP, we can add them, but the reason I want to limit it, if at all possible, is we have a lot of underfunded projects. And a good example is Agua Fria South Meadows. We've had this on our list and as a priority, I think in District 3 for quite some time, and we've gotten a little bit of money at a time, and it adds up. I think we've gotten, I can't remember, 500,000 total, but over like 3 or 4 different legislative sessions. So we can continue to ask for that money, because not only does it make a project whole, but it doesn't add projects to our project managers list of projects to do. Again, we're kind of understaffed, so we want to try to limit that as much as possible. And again, if we do a new project, say it's $1 million project, we can do it, it adds another project that we have to manage, and there's a good chance we wouldn't get that $1 million. It may be only $50,000, let's say. So, we want to do that, we can, but then we have $50,000 that may be hard to spend because it's towards a project that's severely underfunded. So we can have those discussions as at the next meeting, and I'll be prepared with the list of projects to kind of go over one by one and kind of explain where we're at with funding on those and if we need more funding or not. But it doesn't mean that we can't have new projects. So if you have any in mind, please let me know. We can put it on this ICIP and start filling out the forms for those. I think that's all I really have for the presentation. Again, I explained differences in different lists. They're not all the same, but you can have one project that's on all the lists. Agua Fria South Meadows is a good example. It's on the IFCIP. It's been in our ICIP, and it's on our capital improvement plan. It's a funded project. It has some funds already on it. So it could be on any of those lists, but we've been asked in the past, can we just combine them and make one master list that serves all the purposes? And we can't, because all the different lists have different purposes, and we unfortunately can't make one granddaddy of a list. So we gotta manage all these lists independently, in coordination with each other a bit, but we do have to manage them all independently. That's all I have. If you would like to, I could do it now or later. I could pull up. We gave you guys last year's approved list just to kind of go over what that list was and what explanation of that list if you guys would like. We could wait till after you guys have questions, whatever you want.
All right, thank you, John. So I can't see everybody on my screen. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I do see Councilor Lindell and Councilor Vihel Coppler. So we'll let Councilor Lindell go first. Regarding the program itself, Councilor Lindell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. John, thank you very much. I have to say, in my time sitting here, that was an absolutely excellent explanation of how all of this works. And I would request that you take that presentation that you just made. You don't need to formalize it, but just if you would put that into the form of an email and send that to all counselors, I think that would help us get through this process much better than we have in the past, because it is confusing and there's a lot of different funds and they're limited to different things. So my suggestion would be, in helping us get through this in a more efficient way, would be if you could put that together. I mean, the IFCIP and the ICIP and the CIP, if people could know the definitions of those and what the limitations of them are and the sources of them, I think that would be super helpful. Secondly, our approved list from last year, is it possible that you could, a couple of things that would be nice from that list. I think we may have been supplied with that list this last week. If you could have that broken out to district, what the district requests were, and additionally, what projects were funded, were given money from the legislature. I think that those would be really helpful things in allowing us to, as you suggest, limit what we're asking for this year and not bringing in a bunch of whole new projects. Is that terribly burdensome to do, John?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Rendell, we would have to create a new list that somewhat mirrors the one that we presented. So I'm just going to do this real briefly just to show you what the list looks like. So this format is what's dictated by DFA. So we can't change this format itself to add districts and what's been funded. But maybe what I can do is just generate a quick, transpose this onto an Excel spreadsheet and then just add those couple of columns for you guys. It'll be more for information, but the one that we're acting on would be this one, because that way there might be discrepancies, and that way we know if any discrepancies occurred, like with the spelling or a number. This is the list that dictates.
That would be terrific. Or if you could just take this list and maybe color code it. Whatever's less work for you to get that information to us. And if it ends up feeling like it is onerous, let us know. And we can think up something else that would be easier to do. But certainly the presentation you gave, defining all of those different sources, I think that would be really helpful for the entire council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Lindell. Thank you, John. Councilor Vihil-Coppler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I basically have some just housekeeping kind of comments, and then we'll have comments later as we get into the nuts and bolts of the projects. But overall, John, what is the deadline to DFA?
The deadline to DFA, if you can give me 1 second, let me pull this up. And then if you have another question, I can, you can either wait or you can field another question while I look this up for you.
Okay, well, the next question is, have the departments taken a look at this list, and has anything changed in their priorities? Or, those projects that have been funded, though not fully, has there been enough activity that we expect we can make any headway next year if the legislature gives us money? In other words, is there anything that has either a greater priority or a lack of priority based on what you know from what the departments are telling you?
So not necessarily. We did send it to the departments, the list, to ask them to revise numbers, scopes, all that for any existing projects on the list. And then they can also use this as an opportunity to add projects onto the list. That being said, the list I showed, and I'll go ahead and show it again just to help provide some context. Maybe I could leave it on. Where are we at? Here we go. Is that it? Yes. Okay. What we typically do is the citywide priorities, we try to make them the top 5 on this list. Mm-hmm. The rest, even though there's a ranking number, in all honesty, number 6 doesn't receive any more preference than number 31 or 39 or anything like that. The reason we don't shuffle those is because not only drilling down, over 60 of them, trying to shuffle all those and make a decision on which one's more important than the other is a bit cumbersome, but even how we enter this into the system. So again, this spreadsheet is what the DFA system spits out. It's not like a tabular thing that we enter stuff in. We actually enter stuff in, and I'll show you that here in a bit. I'll make a note to do that. The forms that we do project by project, and that's what does the system. What makes this a spreadsheet. So what I'm trying to say is if we were to do any more tweaking, it's very laborious for my admin who enters this stuff in, because you basically have to re-enter in every single one.
Right.
And so, yeah, so these top 5 was what we did last year. As we can discuss that now, and through this process to see what our new top 5 is moving forward for sure. I will have looked to get recommendations, at least. Maybe what we should do is at least from like say parks, from public utilities, from any of the other departments that have projects here, if they could be available, I'll make them available at the next Public Works Committee meeting. That way they can go over their projects, give their pitch on why they feel it's a priority, and then you guys can make your decision after that point.
Thank you. I think it's important to, you know, we have the descriptions as you go down this report, project by project. But I'm wondering if some of these are even as important. And then of course, some of the staff is no longer with us. So the other thing I recall from this system is that, let's say, for example, we wanted to move the new main library. If we wanted to move it, DFA's program puts it at the bottom of the list. And that gets back to the staff person have to re-enter everything just to make that like the main library get back to where it was, even if we reduce it one rung down. But I understand that the next, I think it's a good idea again for staff to be able to answer questions about the projects themselves, because we may not know something.
So if I may, before you move on to your next line, I got the answer to your first question.
Okay.
We need to do our final submittal in the DFA system by September 18th. So the timeline, to give us time to enter it in, we're looking to go to, for a recommendation to Public Works Committee on August 24th, Finance August 31st, and on to the governing body on September 9th. And then after that, I'll give us roughly a week to take your comments if there's new projects, to fill in the forms that again I'll show you here in a bit, and make sure that we meet that deadline.
Okay, thanks for that. That's very helpful. The next is just I guess I see some Midtown projects on this list sparse throughout, but I'm wondering, you know, we don't have a development plan per se yet, but from what I've seen, you know, the Midtown campus isn't really going to look like it does now. So I question whether any of these projects on this list, should they be pursued at all? Like tearing down buildings and, I don't know, infrastructure improvements. Is it really necessary to put any more money into Midtown because it might be self-defeating?
Councilor Koppler, Chair Rivera, we can definitely have those discussions on a project by project basis. So this next committee meeting, if you guys want projects removed, we can. I think, you know, we definitely want to consult with the respective staff just to see what importance the project has. But I think keep doing some housekeeping does have some merit. In the past, this list just, it begins to grow. It has a tendency to grow. And, you know, several years ago, it was a list that was probably compiled of 40 years worth of councilors and mayors. And it was a very big list. We did a purge probably 2, 3, 4 years ago, within the past 5 years. And so it's a smaller list, which is nice. So again, if there's projects that the governing body that feels that we shouldn't pursue, at least for the time being, and we remove it, I think it's, you know, it's beneficial, and it'll make the list help the list to continue to be more manageable. And then it helps us with entering, like you said, the data entry with all that stuff. It takes a lot of time. And again, I'll show you the form here in a bit, whenever you guys are ready, to show you for each project, everything that we have to enter in.
Well, I appreciate that. I just think as we go through this, we ought to keep our eye on whether, you know, the question should be for Midtown projects, if they can be answered at all, I don't know, as to whether putting money of whatever project is on the list is absolutely necessary for some public safety issue or such, because it would be heartbreaking to put money in, and I don't think the legislature would feel too happy if we put money in something and then, you know, the development team turned around and shut it down. But the other question I had is, I know that I think we had a gas line last year and maybe some technology, if I recall. Did that get done to Midtown? No, Regina?
Chairman, Councilor Vihil Coppler. So I just wanted to clarify, the funds that we've been requesting for Midtown were so that the city would have funds should it need to make investments in infrastructure as part of pulling together the whole redevelopment project. So we didn't have ideas to go developing things or doing projects. It was really so that we would be sitting on our side of the table to negotiate the right distribution of responsibility of underground infrastructure, street infrastructure and whatnot to really help that development work financially for the city as well as for the developer. And so that was really the intention of those funds. And no, we've been, like you said, it really doesn't make sense for us to plow forward with a bunch of infrastructure investment until we really know what the plan is and where it makes sense to invest. And so we've just been sitting on that cash. We have a little bit of cash available for Midtown infrastructure, and any additional that we had, you're right, we would wait until we really knew what the roadmap was for the project.
Okay, well then the first thing you said about requesting the monies to have to be able to in negotiation with the developer, but I think we need to be careful because I think we need to be very specific, because when we lobby the legislature, they want specificity. And I think we need to be sure.
Well, like John said, if you take a look at the Midtown infrastructure request that we made, it was basically the kitchen sink list, like John had mentioned before. It mentions digital, it mentions gas, it mentions road. So it's sort of broader, and it basically says in order to facilitate the redevelopment. But I don't think that got funded by the legislature last year. I think we had funded it through the GRT bond at the end of 2018, okay. Some funds that way. But I don't think the legislature gave us funds for it last year.
Okay, because I thought we did ask for it, so I just wondered if we got it done. Okay, and then the last thing, in terms of how we approach this, I've always thought it would be good, and I know it's hard, but to approach this with a philosophy in mind. You know, such things as public safety and welfare of our residents, and I see wastewater requests. Security for water storage, rehabbing existing sewer lines, replacing pumps. All those, in my mind, are, I would think, but that's why I would want a department perspective, are really important to the well-being of our residents, because when these things are gone, then all of us suffer. And I have a concern, you know, I think security for the water storage sites are important, especially when you have to worry about malicious behavior and, you know, tampering with water storage. I think that's really something that you see in the movies and such, and what a disaster that would be. So, you know, I guess I'm trying to approach this with not so much bricks and mortar as what, if we had to set priorities, it would be good to have some kind of philosophy so that we, especially because I don't think we're going to get a lot of money this next legislative session. But I think everybody can understand with COVID happening that we could experience something dreadful. And so maybe we ought to have our sewer lines working, and our water storage working, and our wastewater working. And things like that we kind of take for granted because they're not the you know, newfangled things, but yet when they go wrong, they go very wrong. And so that's kind of, you know, how I'm thinking. So I just thought I'd share that, and sure that everybody can agree on the same philosophy. So it's kind of pie in the sky, but sometimes it makes it easier to determine what's priority and what we can live without for the next time. So Mr. Chair, those are just my opening comments, and I will have more comments as we get into the nitty gritty. If we are going to get into the nitty gritty, I'm not so sure we are today, listening to what the Public Works Director wants to accomplish with this meeting. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Vihil Coppler. Any other questions regarding the process? Councilor Beta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, so my question is related to senior centers. Because I know there's a lot of federal funding involved in that. And like District 3, for example, we don't have any senior centers. And while it's not something that is an immediate need, I can see that future planning with all the growth and development in District 3, that eventually there is going to be a need for a senior center in District 3. So what is the process for eventually getting a senior center built in District 3, and what list would that go on?
Mr. Chair, that's a good question. You know, if you wanted to put it on the ICIP list, I think a lot of it depends on how much money we can expect to get, say this year, if you wanted to put it this year. And so say if to build one's like a $3 million structure, we, for the capital portion at least, I don't know if requesting that at this point would be worth it, because I don't know if we'd get that much money, but we'd have more information regarding that at this next meeting and then of course, once we get closer to legislative session. We'd also have to worry about staffing it. So that would be part of our operating budget. If the city wanted to do it themselves, another vehicle, you know, we could use our 0.5% GRT bond. So the next time we sell a bond, see where that fits in all the other city priorities. If it gets funded by that, it would then eventually get put on that capital, our normal CIP list. So, you know, if I can just kind of land my plane, I think the ways to fund this operating budget, you know, we're going to need general fund to operate the building itself. So we're going to have to plan for that. Capital budget, it could be either from, I would say the revenue source would be out of one of three things. Legislative money, so it'd have to be on the ICIP, or it would be from our GRT bond, or potentially a GO bond that goes before the voters. Those would be the only ways I could see to fund it. And I would almost think that it would either be GO or CIP GRT to get a reasonable amount of money at this time. Again, I'm kind of pessimistic that the legislature is going to be throwing out a whole lot of money this coming round. And so I would think that they might throw a little bit of money at it, but not enough to be substantial. The other thing we could do is maybe they give us enough money to at least do a study for the capital plan to maybe kind of pick out sites, pick out a need, pick out what year it's needed. I could do some research to see if this capital money could be spent towards that effort. Even though that effort doesn't result immediately in a capital structure, I think it could be justified that it's part of the planning of how we do that capital structure. So it's almost like the soft cost in it. So maybe we could apply for those type of funds this go around if that's the council's interest.
Okay, and then getting to more, following up with what Councilwoman Vigil-Koppler said about like prioritizing and strategizing, and who is responsible at the city for taking a look at the city as a whole and all of the development and the growth and because one thing I hear from residents, not only in District 3, but also District 4 to a certain extent, is there's a lot of growth that has been happening over the years in these two districts, but we don't have the things that the other districts have. Of course, the other districts those populations have been there a lot longer, but is anybody taking a look at, well, how are we gonna put these projects together so that the rec centers and the senior centers and the different public facilities are in District 3 and 4 the way they are in other sides of the city? Do we have a department that's responsible for that, or who is anybody doing that? And is that something we should start to take a look at?
I don't think we have any of that type of planning effort going on in the city. I'm not sure where it would be housed. I don't know if Regina or any of the other councilors know, but I would think it would fall within the respective departments. So for instance, if it's a park expansion, maybe parks would want to start considering that. If it's a senior center expansion type thing, it'd be something maybe headed by community services or the new department. My experience in what's happened, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but it's almost the model that the public schools take. They take a more reactive approach, and I think the reason for that is because they don't want to build schools unless they know there's going to be students there. So it's hard to gamble and plan that there's going to be students there and there's not. So what they do is a combination of redistricting. Once they have a demand, they redistrict for a while, then they build new infrastructure, and then they kind of balance it out. And I'm thinking that's kind of the model that we're kind of following, right? Is we wait till there's the people there, and then we hear the demand, and then we kind of react and we start trying to build that infrastructure and play a little bit of catch up.
Right, and well, one of the problems with that though is then you have the other districts, the older ones, 1 and 2, whose facilities then need maintenance or rebuild, and so then we're juggling, well, should we fix these ones or should, like for example, there's no rec centers in District 3. But then you have Salvador Perez that needs rebuilding and we stick 2 million in there so then it kind of pits the counselors against each other where it's like, well, we should give the money to Sal P because that's a building that's falling down. Well, we don't even have any rec centers in District 3, so we should get the money. So I think that's something that we need to take a look at long-term for how we prioritize. Like Councilwoman Vigil Koppler said, what's the strategy, the overall big picture, and so that we're not just pitting against each other, or whoever, is the loudest voice gets the money for these projects. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Beta. Ms. Wheeler, I think you were trying to break in there for a second. Did you have something to add?
Thank you so much, Chairman. I just wanted to add a couple of things. Councilor Beta, we did start foreshadowing that we would add to the teen center site and add on senior services there and create a multi-generational facility where you could really leverage some of the same facilities as well as the energy and presence of teens and seniors working together at that site. And so we resource sites, so we are sort of making a roadmap for that. But something that's kind of a completely different subject that I wanted to raise and been thinking a lot about lately is that I wonder if buildings of the future look different than buildings in the past. There's conversation that COVID will be with us for years. And we may never be able to, it may be time to really rethink how we build our buildings to support that future. And so I'm sort of, sitting here thinking, we need to hurry up and spend our legislative funding, but we don't want to build a building that we can never operate because of the new reality with COVID. So I think it's important not only that we have the strategy that Councilor Beta is talking about with responding to growth and development in our community, while maintaining facilities, but also what does the new building look like? What does a teen center look like in the days of COVID? And so I just thought, I haven't got the answer to that, unfortunately, and I think we'll do some research quickly to see, but I think it's something to think about and then as well as what Councilor Vigil Koppler was raising up was the thematic approach, so that, it's not just sort of throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall. One of the themes that seems to be sort of resonant in the state level right now is safety nets and with people. So, do we have the safety nets we need for maybe, if this financial crisis extends for some period of time and a number of our residents continue to be needy, have needs that we might be able to help fulfill. And so I think another one inside a COVID timeframe might be to think about a safety net strategy on our capital improvement too, or what other kinds of strategies might arise inside COVID. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. Councilor Garcia, you are on my screen. I don't know if you have any questions or not.
Mr. Chair, no, I don't. I think the other councilors brought up great points, and we just want to Councilor Beta's point, we want to make sure that we're providing equitable services across the city. And as John said, there's probably not going to be a lot of resources to go around this legislative session. So we really have to be diligent where and what resources we ask, because, for example, requesting resources for a study helps us build that foundation to gain support for a request in the future. So I think we've really got to be strategic about how we approach this. And I know there's a lot of, I would like to's on the list, but there's also a lot of we needs on the list, and it's going through and weeding out. And ensuring that we get the needs fixed, especially given, not only our fiscal future, but the state's fiscal future, and how do we provide those equitable services to our community members? But thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't really have any questions.
Thank you, Councilor Garcia. Councilor Villarreal, thank you for joining us. Did you have any questions for John or staff?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to follow up on some of the points that my colleagues made. And thank you, John, for putting this together and having an explanation for us instead of how we've done it in the past. I think this was helpful, the structure. My inclination is that the kind of projects we should put on the list would be more around the health and safety needs. And I guess my question to you, John, or maybe as you follow up and we begin thinking about the list, I'd like to know if the legislators are thinking more towards projects that, like you said, safety nets, but I think I'm just thinking ahead, like if there are projects we still need funding for, but we're not going to be able to use them given the circumstances with COVID. Like, for example, if we did actually have or completed the Southside Teen Center, would they think that that wouldn't be the right use of money at this time because we wouldn't be able to open it? I'm just throwing these ideas out there, and that's what I want us to be strategic about, because if they're not going to fund that because that doesn't seem like something that in the immediate needs of COVID that would be even possibly be able to be open, then would that mean that they wouldn't fund something like that? And should we look at the list in a way that what are the things that are really the immediate, considering our circumstances? And I don't know what that means, but I was just thinking about District 1 and the fact that we're still trying to get funding for safety measures on Harrison. So that would still be a priority, at least for me. And then just thinking about in District 3, the fact that more and more people are using parks, and would it make sense to continue the different phases of that park, considering that that's where most people are spending their time right now because of COVID. So I don't know, I'm just trying to think of the things that make sense given our circumstances, and if that's the way they're going to approach it. And if you have any insight, John, or any staff, about if we can think about that or get that information. And I don't know if our lobbyists would have that yet, but it would be helpful to kind of see where they're going, given that it's going to be limited, the funding is going to be limited, and how could we best position ourselves so that we could get at least some funding? And then my other question, John, you gave us the list of like what has been funded thus far, but I was just curious, out of what we placed as our top 5 last year, what was the amounts that were funded for the 2020 legislature? Because I think this is an amount, the amounts given were a compilation of funding to date over a period of time. It doesn't necessarily mean it happened this last fiscal or this last legislative session. So if you could let us know about that too. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you, Councilor Villarreal, Chair Rivera. So I will get you, I think we can put together a very easy list that transposes the proposal by district with what's been funded, because I think that's valuable information. I think your point about themes is an important one, because it's what theme does the city want to have, but then what theme do we think is going to be supportive of the legislative session? And there's a good chance it's going to hover around COVID and just the new normal and how we attack that. And it's going to be tricky because maybe a lot of the new programs or the new infrastructure we need for programs to accommodate COVID, are we going to have the money to make a big difference? And do we need to make that difference short term, or is COVID going to be a more long-term thing, like how Regina said it could be? So those are going to be definitely difficult things for us to balance. Having a thing, Teen Center has quite a bit of funding. Do you want to continue that? Well, we already have that funding, and a little more, could be helpful in at least realizing one of the first phases so that when we do get out of COVID, we're ready. So another thing that can be considered is if we can't use it if we're not going to be able to use this immediately for safety needs, can we use it to set ourselves up for when we're past this, if we ever do get past it, that we'll be ready for the new norm, which I think is going to still involve, in my opinion, a bit of face-to-face, because as much as I like seeing you guys on screen, it's nice to be around people, and I'm for sure jonesing for that myself. And I do think even my kids, being around other kids and interacting is something that would be nice, that we're ready for when that time comes. Another thing to keep in mind, and I should probably mention this with my whole preamble, was this legislative session, starts at the beginning of the year. We can expect the funding to be available for us the following January. That's usually the time frame it takes, especially for bond type funding, severance tax bonds, which is probably going to be our primary funding source as opposed to general fund, state general fund. And so by the time we get an agreement from them and it gets goes through the veto process, we get an agreement, we get it executed. We usually don't have it till the following January. So we could probably expect this money January of 2022. So planning for that, you know what I mean? So that's another thing to consider is, man, if we could have planned for this, well, the planning would have been last legislative session, but we didn't know what was happening at that point. So it might be too late to plan for this year if we're thinking this year is a time frame for the improvement. So those are things for you to consider, but definitely a very good question and a very good topic for us all to look at it moving forward.
Thank you, John. Anything else, Councilor Villarreal?
Thank you.
All right. Councilor Cassett Sanchez, I see you've joined us as well. Is there anything you would like to bring up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having me today, and thank you, John, for that presentation. That was really helpful and really explaining everything. I don't think anything too new, really looking at similar pieces. I think in terms of COVID, the piece that's really been ringing in my ear is that we know that outdoors is something that is pretty crucial for a COVID safe environment, and we are probably still going to be here for a while. So looking at what some of these outdoor infrastructure programs might look like, and where we can align both the long-term issues that we have already seen in the city in terms of outdoor spaces. And I've really been thinking a lot about parks and updates that are needed to parks, as well as how that not only can assist us in a COVID environment and having more opportunities for people, but also what that means long-term as we move into a post-COVID world, which, yes, it'll probably be around for probably ever, but potentially can move down to more like a seasonal flu is the hopes that we are seeing right now. So how do we, again, align those priorities so they both address the moment as well as are good investments for when we are not in a full pandemic? So something else to be thinking about, I think, as we're looking at those priorities. And John, as you have more information on where we might be seeing some of those priorities come through, as well as what other departments are saying, that would be key for me. And then to speak to Regina's point and Councilor Villarreal about the safety net, I think that is another really big piece that we will be seeing the fallout of COVID, even if COVID is no longer a health threat in the sense that we are still quarantined. The fallout of COVID on the economic vitality of our city and the stability of our residents is going to be felt for a very long time. And so I think that will be something crucial of how we can align those priorities there as well.
Thank you, Councilor Cassett Sanchez. Councilor Vigil Koppler, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to just say that I think we all need to be ready to kind of pivot too, because the legislators have their own wish lists, and we saw that very clearly last session. And so, while some of these we can set up everything we want to set up, but you go down there and then things change. For example, I was down there lobbying and we had our priorities, and then I know that Senator Rodriguez was very helpful. And one of the things she really wanted to was to push for our sidewalks. You might recall that. We had money requested in there for sidewalks, and she was very supportive of that, but then went into caucus and came out having to give that up for another project we wanted. And I can't remember if it was the airport or what it was, but so we lost the sidewalks. So, I think we just have to be prepared for what things that they want to accommodate, and they may not be in our priorities at all, but I think we have the wish that we'll take what they give us. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in January, if we're even going to have the kind of access that we had last year to walk in and corral people, and it's all based on relationships. And so sometimes you have better access than others, but right now, I mean, if we have to try to influence like we're doing right now on these squares, I just don't think that's going to get it for us. So, we're going to have to use our telephone skills, use our relationships to call these legislators and have coffee, or, just do off Zoom meetings, because if we're doing that, it's just going to be so different. So I think this year personal relationships with our legislators is going to be important. That's the way it is. I mean, Mountain West just canceled the whole football season. So, oh no, now I'm thinking legislative stuff is going to be really hard. But, it's never too late to develop and start calling your legislators now that well, and just, establishing that relationship, because I think that's how it's going to go. I don't think we're going to be able to sign on as a panelist all the time for those meetings. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Vihel-Coppler. Anything else from the committee? I don't see any hands up, so I have a couple questions. John, can you talk about those items that are on the list that have legislative monies that we haven't spent? How successful have we been in the past for asking for additional funds if we haven't spent what we already have?
Mr. Chair, we've actually been fairly successful. I think a lot of times what our reasoning is that we didn't receive enough funding. So if it makes a project whole, that helps. And if we've shown at least some movement on the project, it's helpful. So Albufeira South Meadows, I like to bring that one up because I'm more familiar with it. It's received money over several years. It meets that one criteria where we need more money. They didn't give us that much, but we've been showing activity. So the first installment, I think, was $25,000, and they gave that to us, I don't know how long ago, but we've spent it. So we've been continuously spending money. So we might not have spent all of last year's legislative money, but the year before we've spent and the year before we've spent. So it shows that we're capable of at least doing it, if not within a year's time, soon after that. Then secondly, most of the money that we received the year before doesn't get spent because like I said, the funding agreements aren't executed till this new legislative session starts. So we're usually a year behind anyway. So most of the time they're not too critical if we didn't spend last year's money because we've only had it for a few days once the legislative session starts. So we have that going for us as well. But again, movement on the project, showing that we can encumber money, that helps. And then I think maybe reputation, this is what I would assume would have influenced me, just in governing governments on how well they've spent money just in the past. And I think for the most part, we've moved forward fairly well.
All right, thanks, John. So is it better to add on to those projects that we've already been successful in getting funds on that just need additional funds to complete?
Well, there's pros and cons. So the pros would be that it doesn't increase our project number for the amount of project managers we have. It doesn't increase our workload. Again, making a fuller budget makes it a lot easier to complete a project, especially if we don't have another potential funding source identified. The cons are, is it a priority now with the change? You know, the airport maybe. You know, right before COVID, right, it was definitely a priority, but now, you know, how much airport activity could we expect within the next couple of years? Those are things that we consider. So there's pros and cons to it for sure. But strictly from a project management standpoint, you know, definitely fully funding a project and getting something finished that we've started is always nice, because it's just not a project that could have been and we didn't do it, and then we just squandered the money and nothing ever came about it.
Yeah, we've had questions about water projects in the past, and I've seen it work both ways, where sometimes they go through the water authority, sometimes they go through legislature. I think Governor Martinez at one point said all water projects go through the authority. And maybe this is a question for Mark Duran, but do we typically see water projects on our ICIP list, or do those go through the authority?
That's a very good question, and I'll definitely ask. I'm making a list of questions to ask Mark. And I think there's different types of water projects, right? Stuff that improves our distribution. But say if it's a water project for our golf course, that's different. So to me, like a project like that doesn't really serve our utility per se. It serves a customer, which is a public facility. And so things like that, you know, without asking Mark, I would think those would be definitely doable, but I can ask just about general utility and projects if those are or not.
Okay. I have a couple more questions, but Ms. Wheeler, I see your hand up. So do you have something to add?
Thank you so much, Chairman. I just wanted to add that I think the councilors might remember, but I just wanted to reiterate that we have a phased strategy for the airport expansion, and the amount of funding that was received last year will take us through a good, strong phase that'll make a difference at the airport. And so I don't think we would, as staff, would recommend seeking additional funds for the airport at this time.
Okay, thank you. John, or Mark, I think, has asked for a cap on our own district projects. And I think in the past it's been, I want to say 100,000. If you can ask Mark, or if you know what that cap may be, that'll help us moving forward as well.
Yes.
And then it may be valuable to have Mr. Duran make a presentation at our next meeting, where we'll actually begin to start taking action on some of the items with the overall list. So I don't know if you want to ask him to join the meeting, or if you just want to ask all the questions and have the answers that he gives you. Again, there may be more follow-up, so it might be good to have him give a brief presentation. So if you can ask him to do that, that would be great. And then lastly, Councilor Beta, I think it might be a good idea to have this go through Public Works and then follow it up on Finance Committee. John, if you think the schedule will allow it, so that all the councilors, all the governing body members have a chance to look at the list, add to the list, ask their questions before we get to the governing body in general. Are you okay with that, Councilor Beta?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. I'll get with Mary and see how we can put it on the agenda.
Great. Thanks, John. If you can follow up with that as well. That's all I had. Councilor Vigil-Koppler, I see your hand up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question about Mark Duran's term of his contract. Is he still valid through next session?
Mr. Chair, Councilor, that's a very good question, so I can follow up with that as well.
Okay, thank you.
That is a good question. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so really good, just general information as we begin to move forward with the ICIP list. A lot of things to think about, a lot of things to look at within our own districts to see where we might want to go. So thank you, John. I'll entertain any more last minute questions if there's anything else.
Mr. Chair, if I can, so, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but if you guys, if there's any questions you have, of course, feel free to give me a call. If there are any projects that you would like to be, considered on the list for discussion at next Public Works Committee meeting, please let me know, especially if it's a new project that we need to put together some cost estimates for. But anything like that. Again, I'm not trying to advocate for a bunch of new projects, but in the event, now is the time this is your call for projects, I guess, for our next meeting.
Yeah, and Councilor Lindell, you brought up a great suggestion about breaking down the list by district. I think there was another recommendation about monies that were already spent, where we're at on projects, so things that can probably be removed from the list. I assume we want that in advance of our next Public Works meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be appreciated.
Yeah, what's the amount of time that we're looking at? Would you like it the Wednesday before, the Friday before? I think we should give that.
Yeah, Chair, I think that whenever John could have it prepared, certainly by the Friday before, but if it's something that they're able to put together and get out to all counselors prior, I think as soon as it can be completed would be much appreciated.
All right,
in addition
John.
to the narrative of explaining to people all the sources and conditions on the monies.
Thank you. John, is that something you think you can do a little bit in advance of our next meeting?
Yeah, so what we'll try to do is last year's list, since that's going to be kind of our starting point, try to get that to you as soon as possible. And then whatever's formally presented to you, including amendments, try to get that to you by no later than the Friday before the meeting.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you all. Any matters from staff, John?
Mr. Chair, I have no matters.
Mr. Jones?
There's no additional matters, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any matters from the committee? Don't see or hear anything. I have no matters except that our next meeting is Monday, August 24th. Unless there's anything else, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, members of the committee. Appreciate all you and be safe.
Thank you, Chair.